The mechanical world of Galactic. Serena awoke with a jolt, her eyes snapping open in a world she didn't recognize. The familiar hum of Earth's air, the smells, and the chaotic city noises she once knew, gone. Instead, she found herself in a cramped, cold, metallic room, the walls gleaming a dull, eerie blue-gray. The air was thick, almost like a mist, yet it carried an unnatural sharpness to it. The ground beneath her was not solid earth, but a smooth metallic surface, vibrating faintly under her touch. Her body was stiff, her mind fogged, as though she had been in a deep sleep for far too long. Her head pounded as fragments of memories flickered in and out of focus, but one thing stood clear: she was no longer on Earth. As Serena tried to push herself to her feet, she noticed the ship's interior was unfamiliar, its design cold and strange. There were no buttons or levers, only smooth, flowing lines and glowing symbols she didn't understand. The ship had no windows, no view of the outside, just the feeling that it was moving, hurtling through space at an impossible speed. Suddenly, a soft mechanical hum filled the air, and the walls began to shift, revealing a dark, fog-filled expanse outside. She could barely make out the shape of a planet through the haze, distant, like a shadow in the mist. It looked like nothing Serena had ever seen before. The planet's surface shimmered in a metallic sheen, as if it was made entirely of cold, polished steel. No continents, no oceans, just an endless, sprawling expanse of technology. It was like staring into the heart of a machine. Before she could even process the sight, the ship lurched as if docking, its metallic body vibrating with the force. The doors to the ship slid open with a hiss, and a strange, pungent smell filled her nostrils. She stumbled out into a world where the sky was clouded in mechanical fog, the ground below covered with dark, rigid structures. Towering spires of steel and glass rose from the horizon, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch out of time itself. Everything appeared ghostly, distant. The cityscapes were just silhouettes behind a veil of mist, as if the entire planet existed in a dream. No natural sunlight, no green earth, just cold metal and an endless sea of machines. This was Galactic, but Serena didn't understand how she had come to be here. She couldn't even remember how she had gotten on the ship. Had it been a dream, a vision, or was it something far worse? As she tried to gather her bearings, something caught her attention. Scattered across the ship's entryway, written in symbols she did not recognize, were faintly glowing markings. They seemed almost familiar to her, an eerie echo of something she had seen before, but not on Earth. They resembled ancient runes, some of them strange combinations of shapes and lines. And yet there was something undeniable about them, something she couldn't place. The symbols whispered to her, teasing the edges of her memories. She took a few unsteady steps forward, her heart pounding in her chest, when a low voice echoed from behind her. "You are not supposed to be here." Serena turned sharply, but saw no one. The voice, mechanical and cold, seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The fog parted briefly, and before her stood the Illyrians, their tall, silvered forms gleaming with a mechanical sheen, their faces unreadable. Their eyes, glowing with an eerie, unnatural light, seemed to scan Serena as if she were something more than just a lost human. The Illyrians did not speak as she approached. They simply watched her, observing from their towering height. For a moment, Serena felt as though she were not merely a visitor in this strange world, but the center of something far more complicated. They had been expecting her. There was no surprise, no panic, just a quiet understanding in their cold, calculating stares. For the first time, Serena felt a twinge of unease. Why was she here? How had they known about her? And why did it feel like this moment, this meeting, was not a random event, but a part of something larger? Something hidden, something dark. Suddenly, Varian stepped forward, his presence commanding attention. His figure seemed almost indistinct, blending into the surroundings as if he were part of the very planet itself. His eyes met Serena's with an unsettling calmness, the blue glow flickering slightly as if her gaze were reaching into his soul. "You were chosen," Varian said in a voice that was both human and alien. His words echoed in Serena's mind before she even fully heard them, leaving an imprint that felt too familiar. As if this moment had been written long ago, in some forgotten history. "Chosen," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Chosen for what?" Varian did not answer her question directly. Instead, he motioned toward the horizon, where the distant, towering spires of the Illyrian cities rose like silent sentinels. "This world was never meant to be like this," Varian continued, his tone suddenly tinged with something Serena couldn't decipher. Fear, perhaps. It was once a place of peace, of perfection. But now, something is coming. Serena felt a chill run down her spine. She had no idea what he meant. But the way he spoke, the way he watched her, it felt as if she were part of something bigger, a plan she couldn't yet understand. Before she could ask another question, the fog closed in again, obscuring everything but the gleam of the metal around her. She was surrounded, trapped in a world that seemed to stretch on forever, a place that could have been both her salvation and her doom. In that moment, Serena realized that she wasn't here by accident. The Illyrians had been waiting for her, and her arrival had set something in motion, something she couldn't yet comprehend. A dark force, perhaps, or a prophecy long buried beneath the steel and metal of this twisted planet. And no matter how much she wanted to escape, she knew deep inside that she couldn't. Not now. Not when her fate had already been sealed. The unseen hand of fate. Serena's heart raced as she stood amidst the mechanical fog of Galactic, surrounded by the Illyrians, their cold eyes locked on her. She could feel the weight of their gaze like 1,000 unseen hands pressing against her, demanding something from her. The planet, the ship, even the air around her, all seemed to be watching, as if everything had been set in motion long before her arrival. Varian, the Illyrian who had spoken to her, remained eerily silent for a moment, his piercing gaze never leaving her. It was as though he were waiting for something, gauging her, measuring her in ways Serena couldn't understand. The tension hung in the air, thick and suffocating. And yet, in that moment, she felt an undeniable pull, a force beyond her control, guiding her in ways she couldn't explain. Chosen. The word lingered in Serena's mind, reverberating with an unsettling resonance. She had heard it, but what did it mean? Why was she here? Was it a simple accident, a twist of fate? Or was there something deeper at play, something ancient and far-reaching? As she stood there, lost in her thoughts, the fog began to shift around them, swirling like a living thing. The faint glow of the city in the distance seemed to flicker and pulse, like a heartbeat in the distance. It beckoned them, pulling Serena and the Illyrians toward it. Varian didn't move, but his eyes softened, just for a fraction of a second, before he turned toward the path ahead. "Follow me," he said, his voice low, commanding. But there was something else in his tone, something Serena couldn't quite place, a hint of urgency, perhaps, or fear. It was a strange contrast to his otherwise detached demeanor. Serena hesitated. She had no idea where she was going, what awaited her, or even what Varian's intentions were. But she had no choice. The planet, the ship, the Illyrians, everything around her seemed to be pulling her forward, and she had no choice but to follow. The fog thickened as they moved, swallowing the distant landscape, until they reached a colossal structure, a vast tower that loomed above them like a monument to some forgotten god. Its surface was smooth, polished, and metallic, gleaming in the mist like a strange, silent sentinel. Serena could feel the faint vibrations of something deep within the tower, a low hum that seemed to resonate through her bones. "This is where we begin," Varian said, stopping before the entrance. His voice, once cold and authoritative, now carried an undertone of reverence, or was it fear? Serena felt a strange chill run down her spine. Something about this place felt wrong. It wasn't just the looming tower, or the strange hum that echoed from deep within. It was the overwhelming sense that this was all part of something she hadn't yet understood, something that had been in motion long before she had ever set foot on Galtheris. Without a word, Varian stepped forward, and the entrance to the tower slid open with a soft hiss. The air that rushed out was cool, but oddly heavy, as if the very atmosphere was saturated with anticipation. Serena followed, stepping inside, and was immediately hit by a sense of claustrophobia. The walls of the tower were smooth, featureless, like the inside of a machine, and the only light came from faint blue-tinted panels embedded in the walls, casting an eerie glow that barely illuminated the space around her. They descended a long corridor, the faint hum of the machinery growing louder with every step. As they walked, Serena noticed the strange symbols etched into the walls, the same ones she had seen earlier, now appearing more prominent, as if they were part of the very foundation of the tower. Some of them seemed to pulse with a subtle energy, like living things, their shapes shifting and warping when she wasn't looking directly at them. "What are these symbols?" Serena asked, her voice barely a whisper. Varian glanced over at her, his expression unreadable. "They are the remnants of a time long before us, a time when this world was different." Serena frowned. "Different? What do you mean?" He didn't answer, and the silence between them stretched, uncomfortable and thick. It was as if he was holding back, as if he knew something he wasn't ready to share. They continued walking in silence, the corridor narrowing as they descended deeper into the tower. Finally, they reached a large, circular chamber at the heart of the structure. The air here felt dense, almost charged with static, and the hum was louder now, vibrating in Serena's chest. In the center of the room stood a massive, intricate machine, its surface covered in more of the glowing symbols. It was unlike anything Serena had ever seen. Its design was both foreign and strangely familiar, a fusion of technology and something else, something organic. Varian stepped up to the machine, his fingers grazing the surface as he activated something hidden beneath the layers of metal. The machine hummed to life, and the symbols around the room flickered, briefly illuminating the chamber with a blinding light. Serena shielded her eyes, but when the light faded, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Projected on the walls of the chamber were images of Earth, of places she recognized, but they were distorted, warped, as though viewed through the lens of a nightmare. Cities burned, landscapes shattered, and figures in shadow moved like ghosts across the scenes. Serena's breath caught in her throat. "What is this?" she asked, her voice trembling. Varian turned to face her, his expression no longer unreadable. "This is your world, but it is not the world you remember." Serena's mind raced. This was impossible. How could they have images of Earth? How did they know? She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The images on the walls shifted again, and now there were flashes, short bursts of scenes from her own life, her childhood, her time on Earth, flashes of moments she had long since forgotten. The machine hummed louder, and for the briefest moment, Serena felt a strange connection, a tug at the edges of her mind. These images, these memories, were not just her own. They were something else, something shared, a connection between her and this alien world that she didn't fully understand. "You were chosen," Varian repeated, his voice now almost reverent, "because you have a part to play in what is to come." Serena felt the weight of his words settle over her like a cloak of dread. Whatever this was, whatever connection she had with Galtheris, she was no longer a passive observer. She had been pulled into something far bigger than herself, and the machine before her, the one that seemed to resonate with the very core of her being, was the key to unlocking whatever destiny had been written for her. And deep within her, Serena felt a stirring, a flicker of understanding. Something dark, something ancient. The path ahead would not be one she could walk back from. The dark awakening. The chamber pulsed with energy, and Serena could feel it in her bones. The images on the walls of the tower shifted again, flickering faster now, as if the machine were feeding on her confusion, her fear. The seams of Earth twisted into something darker, cities burning, the sky filled with storm clouds, unnatural shadows creeping over familiar landscapes. Faces appeared in the projections, some human, some alien, frozen in expressions of terror. Serena couldn't tear her eyes away from the madness unfolding before her. The connection between the images and her own memories was undeniable, yet impossible to understand. These were her memories, but they were also not hers. It was as if something had woven her life story into a larger, more ancient tapestry that she had never known about. Varian watched her intently, his eyes glowing even brighter now. His face was unreadable, but there was a flicker of something dark and uncertain, in the depths of his gaze. "You feel it, don't you?" he asked softly, his voice almost a whisper. "The threads that tie you to this place, to this world. You have been drawn here for a reason, Serena. A reason far beyond what you understand." Serena's breath caught in her throat. What is happening? She was being overwhelmed with the images, with the weight of it all. She reached out for something, anything, to steady herself. Her room was spinning, and the air seemed thick with something malevolent. The machine hummed louder, almost deafeningly now, and the images on the walls shifted one last time. The light from the machine grew brighter, casting sharp shadows across the chamber. In that moment, Serena saw something that froze her in place, a massive ancient symbol flashing on the wall. It was the same symbol she had seen aboard the ship, the one that had appeared on the walls in the fog, the one that haunted her. Suddenly, the room felt colder, darker. Serena's knees buckled, and she collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. The symbols on the walls seemed to stretch and writhe before her eyes, distorting into shapes that twisted her very sense of reality. The words "you were chosen" echoed in her mind, louder now, a constant refrain she couldn't escape. "What is this?" she gasped, clutching at the floor, her voice trembling. Varian stepped closer, his presence now looming over her like a shadow. "You are more than you think," he said. "You have been marked by forces beyond your comprehension." Serena's mind was reeling. Marked? She couldn't understand. There had been no choice. She was a street dweller, an ordinary human woman. She hadn't asked for any of this. She was simply thrust into this alien world, surrounded by beings who knew more about her fate than she did. Varian's next words were softer, almost reverent. "The prophecy has awakened. It was dormant for so long, lost to time, to history. But now it calls to you." The weight of his words hit her like a wave. A prophecy? What prophecy? The symbols, the machine, were they all tied to her in some way? And what was this force that had pulled her here? She had never asked for any of this. But Varian's gaze, that eerie, knowing stare, told her everything she needed to know. She had been chosen, yes, but not for any simple reason. This wasn't fate, it wasn't an accident. It was something deliberate, something planned. For the first time, Serena realized she wasn't just a passive participant. She was a key. Her heart pounded in her chest as she rose shakily to her feet. The room seemed to pulse with energy, and the images on the walls flickered, more vivid and overwhelming than ever. "Why me?" she whispered, her voice hoarse, barely audible. Varian's lips curled into a slow, chilling smile. "Because you are the link," he said. "You are the human born of a past forgotten, the one who carries the knowledge that the Illyrians cannot understand. You are the inheritor of a legacy that has long been buried beneath the machine." Serena felt a chill run through her. Inheritor of a legacy. She didn't even know what that meant. There was so much she didn't understand. "You will help us," Varian continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "You will awaken what has been hidden for eons. You will open the door to the power that sleeps beneath this world." His gaze seemed to pierce through her, into her very soul. "And together, we will rebuild Galactic. We will reshape the galaxy." The weight of his words hung in the air, suffocating her. She was being drawn into something far beyond her comprehension. Something ancient, something vast. And whether she liked it or not, she was at the center of it all. Rebuild, Serena repeated, her voice barely a whisper. But this world, it's already a machine. A cold, lifeless thing. What do you want to rebuild? Varian's smile deepened. The Illyrians have long since forgotten what it means to live, to truly live, to feel, to struggle. They have perfected the machine, but they have lost the essence of existence. He looked away for a moment, as if lost in thought. We have become hollow. But you will restore that which we lost. The words hung in the air like a curse. Restore. Serena felt a flicker of fear in her chest. The Illyrians, so far removed from humanity, had built a world without feeling. But now they sought to change it, to return to something they had lost, something primal. And Serena was to be the one to awaken it. The room grew darker, the hum of the machine louder, almost deafening now. Serena's mind raced. She felt her chest tightening, as if something was pulling at her from the inside out. She had no choice but to follow. But a creeping dread began to build within her. There was power here, unfathomable power. But at what cost? As Varian moved toward the back of the chamber, he motioned to a control panel embedded in the wall. It's time, he said, his voice now commanding, filled with purpose. The final stage is upon us. Come. Serena could feel the pull of the machine, the same one that had once seemed so foreign. It was calling to her, drawing her into something she couldn't escape. And deep down she knew, whether she was ready or not, her role in this story had only just begun. The door to the unknown. Serena stood frozen in the dimly lit chamber, her breath shallow, her mind in turmoil. The eerie hum of the machine reverberated in her chest, like a heartbeat coming from deep within the planet itself. The walls around her shimmered with strange symbols, their glow intensifying with every passing second, as if the room itself was alive and waiting for her next move. Varian's voice sliced through the air, sharp and commanding. The time has come, Serena. We cannot delay any longer. He motioned to the control panel in front of them, and Serena's eyes followed his gaze. A series of intricate symbols were etched into the metal surface, symbols she recognized from the ship, from the walls, from the projections, the same ones that had haunted her from the moment she set foot on Galactic, the ones that seemed to have a strange, almost magnetic pull on her thoughts. With a slight hesitation, Varian pressed a sequence of symbols on the panel. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a low rumble, the floor beneath Serena shifted, and a hidden door slowly opened in the center of the chamber, revealing a spiraling staircase that descended into absolute darkness. The air around them seemed to grow heavier, charged with an energy Serena couldn't quite explain. Every instinct screamed at her to turn away, to run, to escape whatever waited below. But as much as she feared it, she also felt a pull, a strange, magnetic force that tugged at the very core of her being. You must come, Varian said, his tone softer now, almost pleading. It is the only way forward. Serena hesitated, but the weight of his words, the urgency in his voice, pushed her to move. She stepped forward, her footsteps hesitant at first, but then growing more certain with each step. There was no turning back now. Whatever awaited her below, it was inevitable. It was her path. They descended into the darkness. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the silence became. The walls of the staircase were made of the same smooth metallic material as the rest of the planet, and the faint hum of the machinery was now a constant companion. But there was something else in the air, an unexplainable tension that crackled like static, making her skin prickle. As they reached the bottom, the staircase opened up into a vast, cavernous room. It was larger than anything Serena had ever seen, stretching far beyond the reach of the dim lights above. In the center of the room stood a massive, circular pedestal, its surface covered in even more of the glowing symbols. The entire room seemed to pulse with a dark, ancient energy that made Serena's heart race. "This is where it all began," Varian said, his voice almost reverent as he stepped forward. "The Nexus." Serena's eyes darted around the room, searching for answers. What was the Nexus? What did it have to do with her, with Earth, with Galactic? She turned to Varian, her voice filled with both fear and confusion. "What is this place? What is the Nexus?" Varian's eyes glowed brighter, and for the first time, Serena saw a flicker of something she hadn't expected. Regret. "It is the heart of this world," he said softly. "The place where the Ancient Ones, the first Illyrians, connected to the power that now binds Galactic. It is a place of knowledge, of creation, and of destruction. And it is the key to everything that is to come." Serena stepped closer to the pedestal, drawn to it as if it were calling to her. The symbols on its surface seemed to shift, becoming more complex, more alive. They were not just marks. They were messages, messages for her. As she reached out to touch the pedestal, a sudden surge of energy shot through her, electrifying her skin, sending jolts of power into her very bones. She gasped, pulling her hand back, but the energy didn't stop. It was as if the Nexus had recognized her touch, as if it had chosen her. The pedestal trembled, and the air around them hummed with a powerful vibration, building to a deafening crescendo. Then, without warning, a violent pulse of light erupted from the pedestal, illuminating the entire room in a blinding flash. Serena stumbled back, her heart racing. For a moment, everything went white, and she couldn't see, couldn't breathe. She felt as though she were being torn apart, her very existence being pulled in 1,000 directions. The light filled her mind, and in the split second before everything went dark, Serena saw something, a vision of Earth. But it wasn't the Earth she knew. It was a different Earth, one where the cities were not burning, where the land was not broken. It was an Earth where humans had conquered the stars, where they had become the architects of their own destiny. But there was something wrong, something off about it. The people in her vision were changed. Their eyes glowed with an unnatural light, their faces blank, devoid of the emotion that Serena remembered. And then something darker appeared in the vision, a shadow rising from the depths of space, consuming everything in its path, a force that seemed to pull at the very fabric of the universe, devouring entire worlds, leaving nothing in its wake. The vision faded as quickly as it had come, and Serena was left standing in the darkness, gasping for breath. Her heart pounded in her chest, and her mind reeled from the intensity of the experience. What had she just seen? What did it mean? "I don't understand," Serena whispered, her voice trembling. "What was that?" Varian stepped forward, his expression unreadable, but his gaze now filled with a kind of sorrow. "It is the truth of your world, Serena, the truth of our world, and the truth of what is to come. We, the Illyrians, are not the first. We were not the first to find the Nexus." He paused, his voice darkening. "There was another. The humans who came before you, and they were consumed by it." The weight of his words hit her like a punch to the gut. "Consumed? What do you mean?" Varian's eyes flickered with something. Fear, sorrow. "The humans who found the Nexus, long before you, became something else. They were transformed. They became like the Illyrians. And then, when the Nexus grew too powerful, it consumed them, destroyed them. They tried to control the power, but they failed." Serena's blood ran cold. She looked at the pedestal, at the symbols, at the walls of the room. She had been drawn here for a reason, but what was the true cost of this power? Was she destined to become like the humans of the past, consumed by the very force that had pulled her here? Varian's voice broke through her thoughts. "This is your destiny, Serena. The Nexus has chosen you, just as it chose them. The question is, will you control it, or will it control you?" Serena's mind whirled. There were so many questions, so few answers. But one thing was certain. Whatever lay ahead, whatever darkness or power awaited her, she could no longer turn back. The Nexus had awakened, and with it, her true journey had only just begun. The price of power. Serena's fingers trembled as she pulled them away from the pedestal, her mind still reeling from the vision. The sudden, intense surge of images and emotions that had flooded her senses. Her heart hammered in her chest, and the room around her seemed to sway as if the very air had become thicker, more oppressive. She could still feel the energy coursing through her veins, a reminder of the dark force that had been awakened. Varian stood before her, watching with a look that was a mixture of pity and something darker, something almost predatory. His glowing eyes never left her face, as though he were waiting for her to absorb the weight of what had just happened. "The Nexus has shown you the truth," he said, his voice low and calculated. "The power you felt, the images you saw, it is only the beginning, Serena. You are connected to it now, and you will be forever." Her breath caught in her throat. Connected? To what? To the Nexus, to the destructive force that had consumed humanity in the past. The truth about Earth, the truth about the humans who came before. She swallowed hard. What happened to them? How did they fail? Varian's gaze darkened, his expression hardening. They were consumed by their own ambition. They sought to harness the Nexus, to wield it as a weapon. But the Nexus is not something to be controlled. It is a force of nature, a primordial power that cannot be bent to the will of any single being, no matter how powerful they may be. Serena's mind spun. The images of Earth, those haunting, distorted glimpses of a different world, one that felt familiar yet terrifying, seemed to merge with the cold, metallic landscape of Galactic. She felt an overwhelming sense of urgency, as if the very fabric of the universe had shifted, and she was standing at the precipice of something far beyond her understanding. "But why me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why did the Nexus choose me? I'm just a human, a street dweller." Varian stepped closer, his footsteps echoing in the vast, empty room. "You are not just any human, Serena. You are the descendant of the very beings who once sought to control the Nexus. Your bloodline carries the memory of that ancient connection, an echo of those who tried to control the power and failed. The Nexus recognized you. You are the bridge between the past and the future, the key to unlocking the power that lies dormant within this world." The words hung in the air like a curse. Serena's mind raced as she tried to process what he was saying. A bridge. She wasn't some ancient relic, some piece of history. She was just a survivor. Yet, somehow, she had been tied to this force, to the very heart of Galactic, in ways she couldn't explain. Varian's voice grew softer, almost hypnotic. "The price of power, Serena, is never free. Those who sought to control the Nexus paid the ultimate price. Those who failed, their minds shattered, their bodies twisted by the very power they tried to wield. The energy you felt, that is the same energy that broke them. But you have a chance. You can choose to master it, or let it consume you." Serena felt a chill sweep over her as she considered his words. The vision had shown her a fate worse than death, a future where humanity had become nothing more than hollow shells, consumed by their own power, their very essence stripped away. But could she escape that fate? Could she truly control the Nexus? Or was she destined to fall into the same trap as those before her? As if sensing her uncertainty, Varian stepped closer, his voice barely a whisper. "The choice is yours, Serena. But know this, the Nexus has a mind of its own. It does not simply choose who to give power to. It chooses who will serve it. And once you are connected to it, you are bound by its will." Serena's mind raced as she tried to grasp the full scope of what Varian was saying. She wasn't just part of a prophecy or an ancient connection. She was now tied to the Nexus, a force that could either elevate her to unimaginable power or destroy everything she knew. Suddenly, a low rumbling echoed through the chamber, shaking the ground beneath them. Serena instinctively grabbed onto the pedestal for support, but Varian remained unfazed, his eyes narrowing as if he were waiting for something. "The Nexus stirs," he said, his voice filled with a dark, foreboding tone. "It has chosen. The time to act is now. You must decide, Serena. Will you embrace your destiny, or will you fall to the same fate as the others?" The room trembled, and Serena felt a pull deep within her chest, a magnetic force that seemed to reach into her very soul. The Nexus was awakening again, its power growing stronger with every passing second. She could feel its energy calling to her, tempting her with promises of power, of control, of something beyond the limits of human understanding. But at what cost? In the back of her mind, the image of Earth flickered. Those hollow-eyed humans, the destruction they had caused, the price they had paid for seeking too much. Was that her future? Would she too be consumed, twisted by the very force she sought to wield? Varian's voice broke through her thoughts again. "Do not fear it, Serena. Fear is the chain that holds you back. Embrace it. Become what you were always meant to be." Serena's breath caught in her throat. There it was again, the pull, the call of the Nexus. It wasn't just an option anymore. It was a need, a desire so deep that she could almost taste it, as if it were a part of her very DNA. She stepped forward, her body moving almost of its own accord. The pedestal before her hummed with energy, and she knew, deep within her, that this moment was inevitable. She was the key, the bridge. She had no choice but to step into the unknown. With a final, trembling breath, Serena placed her hand on the pedestal once more. The light surged. The breaking point. Serena's hand lingered on the pedestal, her fingers trembling as the energy from the Nexus surged through her, filling her veins with a power she couldn't comprehend. The light around her grew blinding, pulsing with a rhythm that seemed to match the beating of her heart. It was as if the entire world had stopped, frozen in time, and the only thing that mattered was the force surging through her, pulling her into a new reality. For a moment, she felt as though she were no longer herself. The weight of the past, the vision of Earth, the terrifying glimpses of those hollow-eyed humans, everything collided in an overwhelming flood of images and emotions. The past pulled into the present, and Serena saw herself not as a homeless woman from Earth, but as something ancient, something connected to this power in a way she could never have imagined. It was all too much. Her mind, stretched to its limits, teetered on the edge of collapse. And then something snapped. The Nexus reacted violently, its power suddenly overwhelming. Serena gasped as a force like 1,000 lightning strikes coursed through her body, searing her flesh, ripping through her consciousness. The air around her crackled with energy, and she felt herself falling, as if her very being was being pulled apart. She couldn't breathe. Her heart raced, her head spun, and she was caught between a primal urge to scream and an unnatural stillness that threatened to consume her. "Focus." Varian's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and urgent. "You must control it, Serena. You must choose." But Serena could hardly hear him. The room spun around her as the Nexus pushed deeper into her, cracking open the door to something far more ancient than even the Illyrians could understand. Her mind was being torn apart by visions of impossible worlds, of alien landscapes, and galaxies far beyond the one she knew. She saw humanity's rise and fall, the great civilizations that had come before her, and the ones that had been destroyed by the very forces she now felt coursing through her. She saw Earth again, her Earth, but not as she remembered. It was a world consumed by the very thing she had been drawn to. She saw the streets of cities, their lights flickering like dying stars, and she saw herself, standing in the center of it all. What was this? She thought desperately. What is happening? In the flickering light of the Nexus, something began to shift. The images of Earth, of the destruction, began to fade. Slowly, the vision changed into something else, a vast, empty expanse, the void of space stretching on for eternity. In the distance, a dark, massive shape loomed, something so enormous and powerful that it seemed to eclipse everything else. It was a ship. No, a fleet. The realization hit Serena like a punch to the gut. This isn't just about me. This is about Earth. This is about all of us. The Nexus was not just a power. It was a force that had shaped the very course of the universe. And it was now hers to command. No, she whispered, her voice breaking through the whirlwind of thoughts. I didn't ask for this. I didn't choose this. The room seemed to close in around her. The pedestal hummed louder, almost like a heartbeat, as if it were alive. The Nexus itself was alive, responding to her fear, to her doubts. Serena could feel the presence of it in her bones, the cold whisper of ancient intelligence that beckoned her to step into the unknown. But something deep inside her resisted. She couldn't let it take her. Not like this. Varian's voice cut through the haze. You must embrace it, Serena. You are the one who has been chosen. There is no turning back now. Serena shook her head, a surge of clarity breaking through the overwhelming flood of power. You don't understand, she said, her voice stronger now, defiant. This power, it isn't meant to be controlled. You're right about one thing, Varian. The Nexus doesn't choose who controls it. It chooses who it will consume. Her words echoed through the chamber, the energy in the room shifting, as though the Nexus itself were listening. Serena closed her eyes for a moment, trying to center herself in the chaos. This wasn't about power. It wasn't about control. It was about survival. She could feel the weight of history pressing down on her, the mistakes of the humans who had come before, their hubris and their arrogance. They had tried to control the Nexus. They had failed. She wouldn't make that mistake. As she took a deep breath, a thought, clear and sharp, pierced the chaos in her mind. I am not them. I am not a pawn in a game I don't understand. With a sudden surge of will, Serena pulled her hand back from the pedestal. The light flickered in the room, and the Nexus responded with an angry pulse, but she stood her ground. I choose to break free. Varian stepped forward, his face filled with confusion, his eyes narrowing. You cannot turn your back on it, Serena. You have no choice. You are the key. No, she replied, her voice steady now. I am not the key. I am myself, and I choose my own fate. The Nexus seemed to tremble at her words, as if it were resisting her refusal. The light grew brighter, blinding her, but Serena stood firm, her heart pounding with the fierce certainty of her decision. She didn't need to control the power. She didn't need to bend to it. She could walk away. And with that thought, the light flickered out. The room fell silent. Serena opened her eyes, the overwhelming presence of the Nexus fading. She looked around, and the chamber, the pedestal, the symbols on the walls, everything seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. The power had receded, leaving only a faint, lingering hum behind. Varian stood before her, his expression unreadable. His eyes flickered with something close to awe, and for the first time, Serena saw a shadow of uncertainty in his gaze. You resisted it, he said, almost as if he couldn't believe it. You truly chose not to control it. Serena nodded slowly, her chest still heavy with the weight of what had just happened. I chose to survive. A silence stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable. For a moment, Serena wondered if she had made a mistake, if she had sealed her own fate by rejecting the Nexus. But deep inside, a small voice told her she had done the right thing. She had made a choice that was hers alone. And that, more than anything, was the most powerful thing she could do. The silence was broken by a low rumble beneath their feet. The ground trembled slightly, and Serena felt the Nexus stir once again. But this time, it wasn't pulling at her. It wasn't demanding her submission. Instead, it was waiting. Varian took a deep breath, his eyes narrowing with something close to resolve. They believe that the Nexus is not a force to be controlled. They believe it is a tool, a means to reshape the universe, not as a weapon, but as a means to create something better. But there are those who will stop at nothing to ensure it remains as it is, a tool of destruction. Serena felt a cold shiver of realization. You're telling me that there are factions within the Illyrians. that some want to harness the Nexus and some want to set it free. And now I'm caught in the middle of it all. Varian's expression was unreadable. Yes, the Nexus has a will of its own, and it has drawn all of us into this conflict. It's not just about power, it's about the fate of the galaxy, of every living thing. Serena felt the weight of his words sink in, and for the first time, she realized just how small she was in the face of this cosmic struggle. She had thought she could walk away from the Nexus, that her rejection of it would mean freedom. But the truth was far more complicated. The Nexus had been awakened, and now Serena had to decide. Would she align herself with those who sought to free it, or would she stand against the factions that would stop at nothing to control it? But there was one thing Serena knew for sure. She couldn't face this alone. "I'm not going to fight for control of the Nexus," she said slowly. "But I'm not going to let anyone destroy everything either. I will fight to stop this madness, even if I don't know what the right path is." Varian nodded slowly, as if considering her words. "Then you must be prepared. The war has already begun, and no matter how you choose, the Nexus will not let you walk away it unscathed." The tension in the room was thick, like a storm about to break. Serena felt the weight of the universe pressing down on her, but for the first time, she didn't feel overwhelmed. She felt ready. The path ahead was unclear, and the stakes had never been higher. But one thing was certain: Serena was no longer just a pawn in someone else's game. She was the one holding the pieces now. The breaking point. Serena's hand rested on the pedestal once more, the energy of the Nexus swirling around her like an intoxicating storm. She had rejected it before, pushing it away with all her might. But now it was different. The Nexus was no longer just a distant force. It was part of her, a connection she could not sever. The visions it had shown her, the possibilities, the promises, had planted seeds deep within her soul. Her fingers trembled as she touched the smooth surface, and she could feel it, the Nexus calling to her, pulling her deeper. The power, the vast, unfathomable force that stretched across galaxies, was within her grasp. But Serena knew, deep down, that this wasn't a choice anymore. This wasn't something she could walk away from. The chamber around her began to hum, the walls vibrating as the Nexus awoke once more, its power surging through the room like a living, breathing entity. Varian's voice, filled with urgency, broke through her thoughts. "You've felt it, haven't you?" he said, his voice low and full of fear. "You can't fight it. No one can. The Nexus is in you now, Serena, and it will never let you go." Serena's vision blurred, and for a moment, everything around her disappeared. The room, the chamber, Varian, all faded into a void. The only thing that remained was the Nexus, its energy enveloping her, filling her mind with thoughts that were not her own. It was overwhelming, all-encompassing. And for the first time, Serena felt like she could understand it. She could feel its ancient primal will, its need to reshape the galaxy, to mold it into something new. "No," Serena whispered, her voice cracking. "I can't." But it was too late. The Nexus had already made its claim. Its tendrils of power wrapped around her, sinking deep into her consciousness. And in that moment, she understood everything. The galaxy was nothing more than a series of moving parts, each one waiting to be controlled, shaped, dominated. She was no longer just a human. She was the conduit, the chosen vessel, for something far greater than herself. The Nexus was inside her now. She could feel its vast, endless power surging through her, filling her with a sense of purpose so overwhelming it consumed everything else. The pain, the confusion, the fear, all of it disappeared as the power flowed through her. Serena's sense of self began to fade, replaced by something darker, more dangerous. Varian stood frozen in place, watching as the transformation took hold of her. His eyes widened with a mix of awe and horror as Serena's body shimmered with the energy of the Nexus. The once human woman was becoming something else, something beyond comprehension. I I don't want this. Serena gasped, her voice barely recognizable. The humanity that had once defined her was slipping away, replaced by a force that was both alien and terrifying. But the Nexus was insistent. It did not listen to her cries. It took her, body, mind, and soul, until there was nothing left of Serena. Nothing but the will of the Nexus, now fully realized in her. Her eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and when she spoke, her voice was not her own. It was the voice of the Nexus. "The galaxy will be mine," it echoed. A chilling, inhuman declaration. "And you will all serve me." Varian, unable to move, could only watch as the woman he had once known was lost to the Nexus, her mind and body twisted into something far greater, far darker. Serena, the human who had rejected the power, had now become its harbinger. She was the force of creation and destruction, the one who would reshape the universe in the Nexus's image. The new ruler. Under Serena's new rule, the galaxy shifted. No longer was it a place of fragile peace, teetering on the edge of war. The factions that had once fought for control of the Nexus were now nothing more than pawns in her game. The Nexus's influence stretched across the stars, bending the will of entire species, all of them answering to Serena's unyielding command. The Illyrians, once proud and cold in their precision, now found themselves broken, their rigid hierarchy shattered under Serena's rule. Those who had once sought to free the Nexus were forced to bend the knee to her, their desires meaningless in the face of her power. Serena, if she could still be called that, had become an entity of unimaginable strength. She was no longer the woman who had stepped foot on Galactic. She was the Nexus, an extension of its will, shaping and reshaping the galaxy as it saw fit. But in doing so, she had lost herself. The warmth of humanity, the spark of individuality, had been extinguished, replaced by cold, calculating logic that could not be reasoned with. Her eyes, once filled with confusion and fear, were now a reflection of the vast power that had overtaken her. She no longer saw the galaxy as it once was, alive, diverse, full of contradictions. She saw it as a machine, a system that needed to be perfected, to be molded. The Nexus had shown her that the galaxy was fragile, filled with weaknesses that needed to be corrected, and she would be the one to fix it. Across the galaxy, whispers spread of the new ruler, the Nexus Queen. Some hailed her as a savior, a force that would bring order to a broken galaxy. Others saw her as a tyrant, a being who had forsaken everything to seize control of the stars. But no one knew what she had become. No one knew how much of Serena was left beneath the cold, iron grip of the Nexus. She was a goddess now, a ruler, and she would reshape the galaxy with an iron fist. A new age of fear. The galaxy, under Serena's rule, entered a new age, one of both creation and destruction. Entire star systems were brought under her control, the factions that had once fought for the Nexus now nothing more than pawns in her vast game. Entire civilizations bent to her will, their rulers answering her summons, their people bound by the influence of the Nexus. But with this new age of power came a price. The once vibrant galaxy, filled with countless cultures, races, and histories, now stood under the shadow of Serena's rule. There was no freedom, only order. No rebellion, only submission. And as the Nexus tightened its grip on the galaxy, its power flowed through Serena, shaping her every move, until she was no longer just a ruler. She was a force, the living embodiment of the Nexus itself. The galaxy had never seen anything like it. The people whispered of her in fear, of the new ruler who had become a god in her own right. Some prayed to her, hoping for favor. Others cowered in the darkness, knowing there was no escaping the power she wielded. No one could challenge her, not with the power of the Nexus at her fingertips. But deep within Serena's mind, there was a flicker of something, an echo of the humanity that had once defined her. It was faint, lost beneath the overwhelming presence of the Nexus, but it was there, a reminder of who she had been. And as the galaxy trembled under her rule, Serena was forced to confront the question that had haunted her from the start. Was this truly the future she had chosen? Or had she become the very thing she had once feared? In the end, Serena ruled with an iron fist, and the galaxy, now forever altered, was left to wonder if it had truly entered a new age of creation or a new age of fear.